Okay, so for today, I'm going to take you through the Fiscal Ship extra credit, the New York City Fiscal Ship extra credit, going through the instructions, and we'll go through each one step by step so that you understand how to play the game to get the extra credit in my class. So first step is, of course, the first instruction here, which says pick 3 policy goals in column A through L by typing 1 in row 7 under the goals you want your fiscal policies to achieve. Of course, one of the requirements of the game to win is that each policy is fulfilled by 3 points summed in line 8. So what does this mean? What do you have to do? You would go to the fiscal ship controls here, right? And I'm going to enable editing so that editing can happen. And you can see what I'm doing here. All right, so we're going to columns A through L. What you see in columns A through L is that we have various policy goals. So you can pick any one, or I should say any 3 of these goals as what you're going to try to achieve through your fiscal policy measures. So for example, let's say that you really have a priority, or you really prioritize fighting climate change. You will put a 1 here. Let's say that you also really prioritize reducing inequality. Put a 1 over here. And let's say at the same time you are really big on tied or torn between keeping strap hangers moving and investing in the future. But let's say that you're really into investing in the future, so you pick 1 here. Now you pick 3 policy goals, and what you notice is that as I entered 1 for each one of these, there were values that popped up in the column, in the rows below the column. If the value is a -1, then enacting the policy, which is in column M, would subtract from the policy goal. If it's a positive green one, then enacting the policy in column M would add to the policy goal. And like we said here in the instructions, when the requirements to win is that each policy is fulfilled by 3 points summed up on line 8. So every time you enact a policy that adds to the policy goal, it will sum up here on line 8. And you'll see that in a second when we get to the other steps. But step 2, pick policies described in column M between rows 11 through 84 by typing 1 in column N next to the policy. Some policies will add to your goals points and some will detract from them. Some will add to the budget deficit between columns O and S on row 6. Some will subtract from it. One of the other requirements to win is closing the budget deficit, making it at least 0 or a surplus in years 1 and 2. So we were just talking about column M, so let's go over to column M first. So in column M, we have a whole bunch of different policies, right? They can vary from requiring EDC to remit surplus income to the city, which if you're like, what is that about? You can click into it. It'll open up a link to the policy goal description. It goes from there to various other kinds of policies. For example, a millionaire's tax, imposing a millionaire's tax on the city, which as you can see here from column K would add to a reduce inequality goal. So for example, if I put the 1 in column N here, right, first thing you see is that it added to the reduce inequality goal, but it also changed the deficit. So if I undo what I just did there, Control Z, you can see the deficit is at $3.516 billion. Enacted millionaire's tax, that deficit drops to $3 billion. So one of the other goals, right, is to close the deficits in these years. Specifically to close deficits in year 1 and 2. So by enacting these policies, not only do you add or subtract from your policy goals, you can change the deficit value. And the goal here is to bring the deficit up to 0 so that the city is operating with a balanced budget in year 1 and 2. So we may want to achieve that by enacting a toll on the East River and the Harlem bridges. But notice that when I do that, it takes away from my reduce inequality goal. For some reason, enacting a toll on these bridges, it subtracts from the goal of reducing inequality, so it adds to inequality in the city. Let me see if it adds to any of the other goals. Yeah, so it also subtracts from the goal of fighting climate change by adding a toll. Um, so you can already see that there's something that you're trying to balance out here. What you're trying to balance is that you want to close the deficit. We brought the deficit now down from 3 billion to 2 billion, but at the same time we've subtracted from our policy goals. So you want to pick things that will reduce the deficit while at the same time adding to your goals. So maybe I want to make PIT more progressive. Perhaps I would like to, let me see if they have it here. Perhaps I would like to, it doesn't add really to any of the goals. It seems like, oh, it adds to fight climate change. So perhaps I want to fight climate change and help reduce the deficit by implementing a meat tax and a fruit and vegetable dividend. And if I was like, what is a meat tax and a fruit and vegetable dividend? I just hover over the cell and it gives me this breakdown of what this is and what people, what proponents would argue, what opponents would argue about it. So yeah, it's a pretty thorough breakdown of all these policies. And there may be other things I would like to do as well, to legalize and tax marijuana, various other options here. So let's see, the last requirement to win is reducing the debt level in T6 to 0. Although you aren't required to close a budget deficit every year, that is one approach to reducing the debt level to 0. You could also get the debt level to 0 by accumulating enough surpluses in any of the years to offset the value of your remaining deficits. So remember the difference between deficit and debt, right? A deficit is when the budget is operating in excess of revenues. The debt is the total accumulation of these deficits after subtracting out the surpluses. So we have a debt level right now, all 5 years, of about $8.6 billion. And you can see from the formula here that it's effectively just a sum of all of these deficits, subtracting out any of the surpluses. So another goal is that although we don't need to have a balanced budget in year 3, 4, or 5, right? 5, 4, 3, what we do need to do is end up with a debt level of 0 by the end, which means that we either need to have all of these enter into at least 0 territory or surplus territory, or we need to have the surpluses in year 1 and 2, because those are the only 2 years you need to close the deficit on to win. You need to have these surpluses be so large that they offset the other deficits in the rest of the years. And of course, all this is achieved by changing what type of policies you want, by adding and subtracting policies, and not all of the policies, for example, close the budget or close deficits, right? All the policies that have green cells in column O through S, they close the budget gap. They add revenue so that the deficit becomes smaller. But there are also policy goals toward the bottom that are in red that might help you achieve, I should say there are also policies at the bottom that may help you achieve your policy goals. For example, fully meeting the terms of the NYCHA settlement would help you achieve the goal of reducing inequality, but it would also add 800 million to the deficit. So there are options for achieving policy goals that may add to the deficit. In total, the whole point of the game is to balance out the desires between achieving fiscal policy goals, which is what every politician deals with. They usually come into office with a set of policy goals they have in mind, but also dealing with the limitations of budgeting in a public environment, and that every policy goal is achieved through some sort of sacrifice. And that sacrifice might, or often is, on the budget side, where achieving the policy goal is possible, but only after expending a certain amount of dollars. The whole point here is that there are going to be places in the budget where you will want to cut back. So you may like the idea of reducing inequality, and you want to meet the terms of the NYCHA settlement, but you realize to do that, what you're going to have to do is cut summer programs for youth, which sounds cruddy, but would add $31 million to the budget. Or let me see if there's something else here that sounds a little cruddier. Oh yeah, a commuter tax. which sounds cruddy, but may add 800 or almost 900 million to the budget in every given year. So balance these things out. Your point is to achieve these goals here, right? You have to fulfill your policy goals, have no deficit in year 1 and 2, and reach your debt level target. So once you achieve all of those things, cell V3 will let you know if you won. And of course, as I said before, you can learn more about each policy in column M by clicking the link in the cell, or if there's no link, hovering over the policy and reading the associated comment. All right. The other tabs here just give you a flash of the city's revenue for fiscal year 2020 and where the revenue sources are coming from. So, take a look at this if you're interested. Also gives you an idea of what the existing budget looks like. So another thing, if you are interested in knowing about, you can see what the existing budget looks like, what the revenue sources look like, and this is a good opportunity to see what revenues look like on a city level, on a local level, and what the budget typically looks like on a local level. Okay, have fun, y'all. Enjoy, and good luck.